every day, multiple strikes are being carried out on targets in eastern Iraq and western Syria. Air attacks against a barbaric enemy, commanded and coordinated from this floating city 1,500 kilometers to the south. As the Iraqi forces intensify their operations to take back Mosul and Tikrit from the ISIS, the United States and its coalition partners have intensified their operations against the ISIS strongholds. Hello and welcome to a Headlines Today special broadcast that comes to you from on board the USS Vinson in the Persian Gulf, or as the Americans prefer to call it, the Arabian Gulf. Over the course of the next half hour, we'll tell you all about the American and coalition offensive against ISIS strongholds in Iraq and Syria. The USS Vinson has been stationed along the Persian Gulf as part of the US efforts to curb the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant. ISIL is also known as the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. The terror group has been wreaking havoc across the region and spreading its tentacles to other countries. In self-recognition of its rising influence, on the 29th of June 2014, the terror group proclaimed itself to be a worldwide caliphate and renamed itself the Islamic State. It not only controls huge territory in Iraq and Syria, but now has operations in eastern Libya, the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, and has influence in parts of Middle East, North Africa, South, as well as Southeast Asia. Known for its on-ground brutality, documented and disseminated through professionally produced media presentations, the terror organization is now considered the world's worst nightmare. So horrific has been its actions that traditional enemies have come together to combat this evil. In an unlikely alliance, Iran, Iraq and Syria have joined hands with the United States, and the USS Vinson is at the forefront of anti-ISIS operations. We are on board the USS Vinson, a 98,000-ton Nimitz-class super aircraft carrier, one of the world's most potent weapon platforms. This aircraft carrier has on board 70 fighter jets, helicopters, military transport aircraft, and an E-2C Hawkeye airborne command and control platform. The aircraft carrier is currently sailing in the Persian Gulf, carrying out an average of 90 bombings and reconnaissance sorties over the Islamic State-held parts of Syria and Iraq, day and night. Captain, the operations that you are undertaking against the ISIS, what is the most remarkable feature when 70 aircraft, helicopters and your E-2C take off? What is the most difficult task?
Well, I think the most difficult task is to ensure that we hit the right targets and make sure we hit only the targets we want to hit. And obviously that's up to every single pilot that flies these aircraft. We have a mission to do to take out ISIS, but certainly that's the only thing we want to do is to hit the right guys. And that's, fortunately, it takes a lot of discipline, and our pilots have that discipline.
Lieutenant Juno is 29 years old. She flies an FA-18 Super Hornet multi-role combat aircraft. She's just returned from a 6-hour-long sortie flying over Iraq, hunting for the strongholds of the world's worst nightmare around Mosul.
Well, it's my dream job. It's very exciting, especially launching off the aircraft carrier and then coming back and landing on the aircraft carrier when we're done flying. That's my favorite part.
A very fascinating aspect of this story is that Lieutenant Juno has been flying over Iraq and Syria. She's a fighter pilot. How many sorties have you undertaken in Iraq and in Syria?
I'm supposed to point about close to 20, around there. I don't know the exact number.
When we look at your aircraft, it's very fascinating. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, and then 14. What does this indicate?
This indicates the number of bombs that this particular aircraft has employed against ISIS during this operation.
Okay. And are these all bombs? Because some of these signs in some aircraft are different. I mean, some look like rockets, some look like bombs.
Right. It's just a shape of the type of bomb that was dropped.
The pilots fly in buddy pairs. Often when they take off, they do not have a pre-planned target. They loiter over the skies of Iraq and Syria, waiting for Iraqi Kurdish Peshmerga fighters on ground to provide specific targets. During the 6 to 7 hour flight operations, the fighter pilots prefer to carry more weapons on board and less fuel. And during this entire operation, decimating ISIS strongholds, they refueled mid-air 4 times before finally flying back to the aircraft carrier. Taking off and landing on board the floating runway is not easy. There are 4 rows of taut metal arrestor wires. When an aircraft comes in to land, it drops a hook that all but drags along the runway, getting caught in one of the arrestor wires, bringing the aircraft to a sudden halt from 150 miles per hour to a dead zero in less than 2 seconds. This is the closest one comes to experiencing a car crash. For taking off, the aircraft uses the catapult technology. Steam-filled catapult pulls the aircraft back and suddenly launches it off the aircraft carrier. Taking off and landing on the aircraft carrier is doubly challenging, as both the aircraft and the runway are constantly moving. Each time an aircraft takes off or comes in to land, a helicopter takes off. This is standard operating procedure. Should an aircraft miss the arrestor wire, it is expected to take off immediately, circle the aircraft carrier, and once again attempt a landing. But in case an aircraft goes down, the helicopter circles around to retrieve the pilot. The pilots are also at risk each time they fly over hostile territory, especially after a Jordanian Air Force pilot was captured and killed in the most horrific manner by the ISIS.
Well, I think that everybody realizes that there's a threat if you were to go down over Iraq or Syria. The reality is that our aircraft are very safe, our pilots are very proficient and professional, and we fly above the threat, and we deliver our weapons from high altitude because we have that ability. And so there's always a risk, but it's a risk that we think is worth taking because of the evil of ISIS.
A Jordanian pilot, his aircraft, I think an F-16, it came down. He was caught and killed in the most barbaric manner by the ISIS. Does that scare you, or pilots like you, brave pilots like you?
Of course it scares us. We know every time that we launch, especially when we're over enemy territory, that there's a possibility of something like that happening. It's affected all of us, but we also know that this is part of our job, and we can't think about it too much while we're flying, otherwise we wouldn't be able to do our job.
The Carl Vinson carries some of the most potent weapons on board. Some of the laser-guided bombs and missiles actually cost a bomb more than $1 million a piece. This is the might of the United States Navy in the Persian Gulf. The FA-18s, Super Hornets and Hornets fighter jets. These are the aircraft that have been bombing ISIS strongholds in Iraq and in Syria. If you look at this aircraft, the number of successful bomb attacks are all listed here on this aircraft. These are the successful strikes against the ISIS in Iraq and in Syria. The FA-18 Hornets and the Super Hornets are one part of the story. If you look all around me in this 98,000-ton displacement aircraft carrier, there are a total of 70 fighter jets and helicopters. The Carl Vinson boasts of carrying for its aircraft the CATM-9 heat-seeking missile, the Slammer standoff land attack missiles with a range of over 100 miles, the GBU-54 laser-guided missile, the Joint Standoff Direct Action Munition, Hellfire armor-piercing anti-tank guided missiles. That is the E-2C Hawkeye. That is America's eye in the sky. It's an airborne early warning command and control system for the US Air Force. Powered by a nuclear power plant, the ship is a mini city. She sails with a complement of 5,300 personnel on board. At least 5 other warships sail along with the aircraft carrier to protect her flanks. The strike group is currently commanded by Rear Admiral C.W. Grady. He explains the complexity of the mission at hand.
The aim of our operation is, as President Obama said, to degrade and ultimately defeat ISIL. So right now what we're doing is we're flying an air campaign, and the maritime piece of it is about a third of that air campaign to set the conditions for the Iraqi security force and the Peshmerga as well to work with the air campaign to do just that, to attack and then ultimately defeat ISIL on the ground.
When Operation Inherent Resolve was launched, the fighter jets would bomb tanks, long convoys and columns of advancing ISIS fighters, both in parts of Iraq and Syria. But after 2,500 plus bombing sorties, the ISIS stands decimated as an organized army, but is still able to hold on to both Tikrit and Mosul.
When we first got here, they were acting more like an army and coordinating and moving, and now they're much more of a splinter group, a terrorist group. Again, I think that's a good thing. It means that they're not as able to move around, but they're certainly do have some large swaths and some big cities that they're still in charge of, and it's going to take some time to root them out.
The current target of these fighter jets are ISIS strongholds around Mosul and Tikrit.
Anytime you fight in an urban environment, it is a challenge. When your enemy does not present itself in massed formations, it is also a challenge. So take the lack of mass troops and things like that, put that in an urban environment, and it certainly is difficult. I'm supremely confident, though, that when the time comes in a place like Mosul, we'll win.
Now the targets have changed from the beginning of these operations. Initial targets were tanks, large convoys and fuel depots. But now the ISIS have also changed their tactics, that finding targets is more difficult for the US fighter pilots. With 70 aircraft flying almost round the clock, the Carl Vinson needs frequent replenishment when out at sea. When Headlines Today was reporting on board the aircraft carrier, USS Rainer, a fleet tanker, pulled alongside to replenish stocks. For this ongoing operations against the ISIS, all the replenishments are now coming in. We are in the middle of the Persian Gulf, and there are 3 other aircraft carriers and ships in this region at this point of time. There is the French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle. Rafale aircraft have flown on board the Carl Vinson and vice versa. You have the USS Rainer, which is a super tanker which is replenishing this aircraft carrier. There's another tanker that is coming in from the other side. All this is indicative of the kind of operations that the US Navy is undertaking against the ISIL in Iraq and Syria. The replenishment exercise takes approximately 3 hours. The entire crew of the ship is engaged in transporting and storing equipment. Stocks being replenished in a floating city. The USS Carl Vinson is replenished every week. It's not just food and other supplies, but also ammunition, and in this case, a jet engine. An engine for an FA-18 Super Hornet aircraft has also just been shipped in, and this engine will be overhauled and put on an aircraft right on board the Carl Vinson. Now when you look around, this is the main hangar of the aircraft carrier, this floating city that has about 5,000 people living on board even as we speak. Any warship in a hostile territory is most vulnerable during the replenishment exercise. In this case, in the Persian Gulf, 3 huge ships were interlinked for the supply of fuel, ammunition and food. Just when this was happening, 3 Iranian Air Force jets were spotted on the radar, approaching the skies near the aircraft carrier. In an unprecedented move, Captain K.O. Thomas immediately ordered 2 Super Hornet jets to take off to protect the skies around the aircraft carrier and the relief ships. Tell us a little about this incident, about when there was refueling on this morning, you suddenly had to order your fighters to take off. What happened?
We had some aircraft that were flying around that we wanted to make sure they knew that they were here. They know that we're here, and so we routinely ensure that if there are other aircraft from other countries that are flying around, that we will have aircraft available and airborne. So that's why we launched the aircraft.
Soon the Iranian Air Force jets fall back to the base and the US Navy fighters return to the aircraft carrier. +800 are women. They are a part of every operation, from flying the fighters to manning the radar stations to handling ammunition and manning the communication network. The women lead from the front, far removed from families. Is it a major challenge? Is your family worried that you fly a fighter plane and that too, targeting the ISIS in Iraq and Syria?
Yes, my family does worry. I've got a husband and a son at home. Luckily, my son's young enough where he doesn't really realize what's going on. But I've got my husband and then my father, my mother. They worry, but they're proud that I'm here and they're very supportive.
I enjoy working with other individuals. We're not much different than men. Being a mother is hard. I only became a mother about 2 years ago, so most of my experience, almost 18 years, has been as a single sailor.
Well, I'm so used to it now, I don't really find it very difficult. You know, you just gotta really know your job, be firm, and be strong.
One such extraordinary woman is Commander Pollard. With approximately 14 years in service, this commanding officer of USS Sentry heads the mine countermeasure ship, a part of the US Navy 5th Fleet stationed at Bahrain. A mother of 2 young girls, Commander Pollard commands the ship that protects the naval fleet from mines, especially the latest threat, improvised explosive devices at sea.
We're professional mariners, and so every day I serve with them and they serve with me right alongside, and never do I feel or recognize myself to be the only woman.
While the business of this ship is launching missions over ISIS, we step below the deck to see what's cooking. Napoleon said the army marches on its stomach. In the Navy, well, they sail on their stomach, and on board the USS Vinson, food being prepared for thousands of sailors. Here we see cake and dessert being made. What are you making for lunch?
Today we're having yellow cake with Reese's Pieces and marshmallows on top.
And food is cooked in those massive drums that you see there. Preparations already on for the next meal. Cleaning process, the food process, there are freezers. What are you cooking today?
I'm cooking the rice and fries, fresh fries.
And after consuming the 4,000 odd calories at the meal table every day, what better place to burn it off than the sea-facing gymnasium? The faster you run, the faster this machine makes you run. And what a better place, what can be a better place than this? You're running by the seaside. This machine ensures you stay fit. Besides its current deployment for Operation Inherent Resolve against the ISIS, the Carl Vinson was also involved in disposing the body of Osama bin Laden in 2011 for a sea burial. More than 1,000 feet in length and 252 feet at its widest, the call sign of this US carrier is the Gold Eagle. And like the Eagle, aircrafts flying off this mammoth floating war machine continue to strike its foe from high in the air. Streaming down the Persian Gulf, there is but one objective that the Carl Vinson has: to wage and win the war against ISIS.